Okay, you're live.
Okay, let's get started. Welcome back. For both Gebser and Jung introduced novel terminology. Although Jung's terms have been adopted more widely, the work of neither Gebser nor Jung, this sounds kind of weird, doesn't it? I'm going to move it down. Hopefully is that better? Yeah, okay. Although Jung's terms have been adopted more widely, the work of neither Jung nor Gebser has managed to alter language sufficiently to convey the psychospiritual realities that both wanted to bring to greater awareness. Consequently, in our struggles to integrate and to individuate, we are hindered by language structures that remain stuck in dualism, subject-object contradistinction, and logical exclusion. Thus, our quest in this conference to participate consciously in discerning and co-creating emerging realities may be served by introducing not just new words, but new classes of signifiers to express the gestalts of diversity within unity, of multiple simultaneous perspectives, of conscious and unconscious, namely in Gebser's jargon, of systasis and synairesis. So I'm going to present a novel auxiliary metalanguage aimed at aperspectivity. Now, this is something that I'm developing. It's in its very nascent stages. So I'm basically showing you, my just born baby. I invite you to help me raise this child. We need a village. We need a community, right? Okay, I'm starting here with you guys. Here we go. So Gebser said, we are compelled, in other words, to find a new form of statement. The new form of statement must not be one which could elicit a unification via relationships, a theory of correspondences or other relativization, or a dualistic or causal dependency. These three forms of realization are achieved, as before, by the magic, mythical, mental, and mental attitudes. The new form of statement must be one of integration. So Gebser recognized the limits of language and even recognized that new forms were starting to come into usage. But he did not propose a new form. He left that to us to do. Although he stuck with the old form, subject, verb, object, or in German, subject, object, verb, he added a lot of neologisms, the jargon that you've heard here at the Gebser conferences that you don't hear anywhere else. Words like awareing, presentiating, systasis, synairesis, atemporal, and aperspectival. Jung also added a few new words to the lexicon and redefined several others. Words like complex, synchronicity, individuate, introvert and extrovert, and active imagination. And Gebser was not alone in calling for a new form of statement or language. The physicist David Bohm also proposed that language should be based more on verbs than on nouns, where movement is fundamental. He called this mode the Rio mode, or flowing mode, and tried to experiment with it via staff and students at Krishnamurti's Brockwood Park School. He found out, however, that the mindset associated with our everyday language was too strong, and as a result, everybody was just using the verbs that he was trying to introduce as his new form of statement as nouns. So he kind of gave up on that. What that points out, to me anyway, is that a new form of language, new words are not enough. A new mindset is necessary. Worf told us, and I kind of believe it, that language informs thought, and thought informs language. And lots of other cultural factors, assumptions, and tacit infrastructures inform both. Hence, what Gebser is really calling for, not just with regard to language, is a cultural paradigm shift. But we all knew that already, right? So, for much of my life, I've been trying to invent a new form of language too, even before I knew of Gebser. These are a couple of the concepts that I invented for my novel, The One That Is Both. The glyph on the left that looks like circles means there is only one side that serves as both sides. So think of a Mobius strip or a Klein bottle. And the one on the next one over, the one that looks like a snowflake, means the deeper you go, the less it looks like itself, and the more it looks like its opposite. I got these glyphs from crop circle designs, as you can see from the photo. However, they didn't really catch on, probably because they're too arbitrary. Nevertheless, I had similar purposes as Gebser to express integrality. And as I said at the Gebser conference in 2017 in New York, I want to find ways to speak not just about the integral or about wholeness, but from it. So since then, I've been playing around a little. And I can't say I have a whole new constructed language like Na'vi from the movie Avatar or Dothraki from Game of Thrones. Both of those, are basically translations from English into a constructed language. And don't get me wrong, I really respect the work that David Peterson and Paul Frommer did on those languages, and what other conlangers have done and are doing to create languages that are based on different assumptions about reality. But like Gebser, I want a new form. So the first question would be, what would speaking from integrality involve? In a nutshell, I think it would involve atemporality and aperspectivity. However, it's difficult to get to aperspectivity using English because English has perspectivity built into its structure at many levels. So at the syntactic level, we say things like, meet me there at 7. Okay, so the perspective is from here to there. Or I'll be back late tonight. The perspective is the there to here, the coming back. At the conceptual level, consider the concept of foreigner. Whether you're a local or a foreigner depends on your perspective at a given location. Here, I'm a local, and a lot of you are foreigners. If I go to where you live, to New York, then I'm the foreigner. And even at the level of causality, some philosophers have posited that causality is based on perspective. But that, I'm not going to go into that here. It would require, a long explanation, but if you're interested, I will give you the reference. So, nevertheless, we are going to try to get to aperspectivity by integrating perspectives. You remember integration from math class, right? To estimate the area under the curve, you break it into rectangles and you add up all their areas. Now, this answer isn't perfect, but the smaller the rectangles, the more accurate the estimate. So the blue, can you see my cursor? No. The blue one would be a less accurate estimate of the integral than the yellow one, which has more of those little rectangles. But this is an additive function, and this is not the kind of integration I mean, not additive. However, you can see that the more boxes you include, it embraces the question of the more perspectives that are included, do you get closer to volitioning? I don't know the answer to that question. So if you consider the 5 blind men and the elephant, adding up each of their perspectives gets you this, not an elephant. This is an illustration of what happens when you try to approach the integral while staying stuck in your own individual perspective. It tells us that something more is necessary. Okay, did we get? No. Okay, and Picasso's approach incorporates time or movement into a merging of perspectives. He offers a playful suggestion of seeing this face from one side and then the front and then the other side. But unfortunately, it does not preserve the integrity of each perspective. I personally have never seen anyone that looks like that, even as I walked around them and beheld them from different perspectives. Granted, he is trying to condense 4 dimensions into a 2-dimensional representation, and he was the first that I know of who tried that, so I really respect him for pushing that boundary. So it's a big question. How do you integrate perspectives in such a way that each contributes to wholeness in a way that enables the wholeness to emerge? So let's take a step back and consider the concept of perspective, especially of knowing one's own perspective. Ortega y Gasset says perspective is one of the component parts of reality. Far from being a disturbance of its fabric, it is its organizing element. Every life is a point of view directed upon the universe. Strictly speaking, what one life sees, no other can. Reality happens to be like a landscape possessed of an infinite number of perspectives, all equally veracious and authentic. The sole false perspective is that which claims to be the only one there is. So I looked for a few perspectives on perspective, and there were a bunch of them. I couldn't figure out. Went too fast. There you go. I don't know if you can read the one with the fish, but the little fish is saying, there is no justice in the world. And the middle fish is saying, there is some justice in the world. And the big fish is saying, the world is just. I would like to emphasize Ortega y Gasset again. Reality happens to be like a landscape possessed of an infinite number of perspectives, all equally veracious and authentic. You can see that very well illustrated there. This gives us a bit of a paradox. And this is an important piece of the quest for integrality. Everything, not just people, but even the chair you are sitting on, the windows around us, everything, an infinite number of things, each with its own perspective, when taken all together, which no single thing can do, can the set of all those perspectives have a perspective? This is basically Russell's paradox with my own twist. I am positing that the set of the infinite number of perspectives ongoingly is integrality. I am reminded of a line from one of my favorite children's books. Quote, "Everybody has got a point of view, but Mr. God hasn't. Mr. God only has points to view." Jung pointed out that we never see all of ourselves. The part that we don't see, he called the shadow. We are generally unconscious of our shadow, although others can see it very plainly. The philanthropist who can't see how stingy she is, the narcissist who projects all his insecurities onto his political opponents, the addict who can't see how much people love him for his sense of humor. We know them all well. We can use the idea of the shadow to think of perspective as well. My shadow, which is not perceivable from my perspective, might be perceivable from another perspective. So I pondered, what if there were a way that we could approximate the integral, not by adding perspectives, but by combining them? Indeed, that idea might be able to get us closer to collective wisdom, if not to integrality. I say collective wisdom instead of collective intelligence because both Gebser and Jung would point out that it is not just a mental thinking perspective at stake here. In the realm of mental consciousness, we do see this happening in big projects, from sending a man to the moon to the Human Genome Project, the Human Microbiome Project, which brought together dozens of teams with different skills, different perspectives to figure out these complex problems. Another way that multiple perspectives contribute to greater knowledge or wisdom, for example, is through online games that require players to work out or solve a particularly difficult task, like figuring out the structure of a protein. Now, what if it were possible to systematize in language, in a new form of statement, a way to consider multiple perspectives so as to work toward a collective approximation of integrality? That's my question, and that's what I'm going to answer, hopefully, in a few slides. But a little more background on my motivations. I'm very interested in systems theory. So I approach this, and I don't think our language, English, does systems theory justice either. So what I'm going to show you was developed with systems theory in mind. I'm also interested in the gestalt that images provide. So I am offering an image-based new form of statement. However, my images are still kind of simple, okay? Like when emojis still look like this, remember that? And then more creative people and different user interfaces enabled emojis to evolve and multiply quickly. Now Microsoft Word automatically turns the colon and parenthesis into that. And then, oops, very sensitive. Then we got, lots of colors and more stuff. And now we have a rich picture language. However, most emojis simply denote objects or emotions that already exist in alphabetic language. They condense 1,000 words, well, maybe 14, into a picture. But emojis are not a new form of statement, as I imagine Gebser imagined. They are a form of shorthand. However, thanks to them, we now have a new graphic user interface that provides a way to similarly enhance my basic infant perspectivals. So here we go. This is the first time I have shown these publicly. I'm a little nervous because, I feel like I'm showing you a rough draft, not a polished product. But I do need to do that so that synairesis, thank you for that word, Jeremy, can further their development. So these glyphs consist of an inner shape and an outer skin. The inner shape represents the type of relationship among core perspectives on a system. Okay, so I'm not talking about a system itself. I'm talking about perspectives on a system. The outer skin denotes the interpretive frame. So one of the basic inner shapes consists of a number of petals connected at the center. This shape implies that the perspectives are relatively independent of each other, yet connected by a central bond or origin. In Jeremy's new book, he says, if an integral understanding from all sides, I don't know if I typed this in properly. I think it's in an integral understanding from all sides, systasis becomes our method, then this moves us into something altogether different from mental synthesis. Instead, we begin to have synairesis, which we might describe summarily here as an expression of the whole. Now, because wholes cannot be expressed through a single perspective, even a well-crafted argument or description will still have its shadow, its blind spots. That is why I suggest that the new form of statement must include multiple perspectives. So these contextual perspectivals are intended to be a way to keep track of which perspective among several is being described or considered with regard to a system. It is a type of sign that provides context by conveying, you are here at this perspective, and now that perspective, among all of these perspectives. The number of petals, in this case here, indicates the number of perspectives. And it's not limited to 3. This is just training wheels. Essentially, these glyphs provide a form or structure for integrating relevant perspectives. Now, perhaps this is what Hokusai was trying to do by giving us 100 perspectives on Mount Fuji, a sacred mountain. So think the sacred. How does one grasp the totality, the sacredness of something like Mount Fuji? Hokusai didn't have, say, video. He couldn't give us a real-time temporal compilation by shooting a movie. But he showed us Mount Fuji in context from the perspective of fishermen, people in town on a bridge, across all the seasons, from far and near, realistically and abstractly. These images also illustrate why I chose to call this new form, this auxiliary language, contextual perspectivals. One's perspective depends on one's context, and context is not absolute. So this is a visual example, but perspectivals are not limited to the spatio-temporal world. I could have shown 5 theories of evolution here instead of 5 pictures of Mount Fuji. There can be more than, as I said, more than 3 perspectives. Now, perspectivals are not a symbol of the system itself, but an indicator of the pattern of perspectives from which the system is being considered. The patterns of perspectives can include hierarchical patterns, heterarchical or holarchical patterns, nested patterns, knotted patterns, and any other configuration as required. The previous set showed perspectives that are independent, whereas this set shows perspectives that are interrelated. And these show nested perspectives that could reflect, say, perspectives across generations, or in systems like the human body, from the perspective of the heart cell, of the heart, of the cardiovascular system, of the whole being, and so forth. So let's look at an example. Suppose a community wanted to put in a dam. They would want to consider how the dam affects many different aspects of the water cycle. So the water cycle is the system being looked at. Okay? So you can look at it from competing perspectives of, say, farmers, tourists or sunbathers, and the perspective of the trees, which the shape of the skin on the outside of these glyphs indicates the context. For example, a limited or local context on the left, a global context in the middle, and a temporal context on the right. Obviously, more permutations are possible. That's the beauty of this. It's to be invented. It's to be expanded. These basic ideas are kind of like, here's an A, here's a B, here's a C. Let's see how we can put them together. Now, you would still have to use regular language to convey the content of each perspective. The farmers would need to convey that they need rain, the sunbathers that they want sun, and we'd have to join our awareing with that of the trees to grok that they need both sun and rain. So a perspectival like this could convey Jungian perspectives on the self. You could use it in a text, such as a book, work it into the book design, put it in the margins. But given that our digital paper or canvas can be much more extensive than an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper and can be hyperlinked, we could structure texts differently so that the actual form of a text is not so linear. Indeed, some ingenious people are already doing this with data. Okay, I'm going to skip a quote from Glenn's book. Sorry, Glenn, go read his book. It's great, Original Thinking. This type of perspectival could be used to fit the work of a business consultant, Carol Sanford, in which each of these sets of stakeholders is interrelated and represented as a different perspective. So imagine sitting in a boardroom not talking about these perspectives, but having a representative from each one speaking from that perspective. Every major decision, for example, whether to close a plant or lay off workers, must be run through this whole process. How will it affect our customers? How will it affect our co-creators, meaning the employees? How will it affect the earth? How will it affect the communities that our co-creators and customers live in? And then finally, of course, how will it affect the investors? Now, if we add a lot more loops to this one for each of us who participated in the dialogue circle last night, this could possibly be a perspectival. I didn't add the skin. We'll have to think about that. For our dialogue circle, speaking to a center, to a shared issue, which was the question that Glenn posed. So the glyphs I have presented are relatively symmetric. I am not attached to symmetry. They are also static. I can foresee their evolution to include motion and to include more complexity. I see us heading more in this type of direction, where the form of statement and the content of the statement are merged more thoroughly. But unless we get some help from aliens, I'm not sure how soon we could get to this point. Perspectivals, as a new form of statement and a new form of writing, have the potential to carry our consciousness not to yet another new form of perspectivity, but to aperspectivity. This could help the new mode of consciousness emerge in its efficient form. This could be the new form of thinking that will help us solve the problems created by the old form of mental rational thinking with its one-sided temporality, which has brought us to the brink. So what do you do when you get to the brink and you can't go back? Oh, you jump. Okay.
Okay, we have 5 minutes for questions. If anybody has one, Jeremy.
You said I could go first.
Okay.
what about things like, are you familiar with things like E prime, English prime?
I've heard of that. It's a conlang.
So it's like English without the word to be, and then taking that to another level, you can add in like taking nouns and making nouns verbs. So no to be's and no nouns, just verbs. So everything's inging.
Yeah, yeah. We
That
did
seems
that at a seed conference once. I was Lisa Ing.
It just seems like that could be some way of drawing out from the image into action.
I think that would be a wonderful way to, a wonderful thing to integrate with this, because it does bring the action into it. But there's multiple actions. And it's about getting, how do we get all of that? How do we jump to, Jeffrey did this.
Yeah.
How do we jump to that higher, that other dimension? I think we need to, the tagline for my website is taking language broadband. It's like we need to add more dimensions to language to bring in enough information to create wholeness. And I think images are a way to go. I think E prime is a great start. It can be integrated. But yeah, thanks.
Okay, so have you heard of or read any of Maria Popova's work? She's kind of a popular blogger for the past 10 years. She has this concept that I really like, that I thought of as you were talking about the beginning of your presentation, about why don't we, instead of adding things together, combine them, and through the combinations, the creative combinations, something of the whole reveals itself.
So.
And I see Popova as one of these interesting writers in the English language who's exploring what Gebser would probably call the new attitude. But she just came out with a book called Figuring, and I think you might really appreciate it for this sort of poetic style of what she calls, again, combinatorial creativity.
Oh, great.
As a means of expressing the whole without doing it in a very kind of quantified, entrapping sort of way. But secondly, have you watched Arrival by Denis Villeneuve?
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
because as we were getting to the end, I was just thinking of the heptapod language and how do you add the fourth dimension to language, and then what happens when you do.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah, that was cool.
Thank you, Lisa. As always, you got me going here, and the one thing that kept popping up for me and looking at the images that you shared is trying to create a more equitable classroom in terms of appreciating the perspectives that each individual learner brings to the table, and also, like, when you are teaching, say, about civil rights or something like that, I could really see students appreciating an image like you shared, and then giving them kind of an image to start with, and then saying, and we're going to be looking into Angela Davis's work, we're going to be looking into James Baldwin's work, we're going to be looking into, and so on and so forth, and giving them an image of equity right off the bat. And another thing that is going on in my mind is, in my past work as a transitional housing director, I used to have like a layout of all the different people that were part of the community. And I wish that I would have had this image versus this kind of like really ugly, boxy image that didn't really inspire appreciation of people's perspective. And I think that this has legs. And I think another thing that popped into my mind were about democracy and being able to, we shared with one another our concerns about people not being able to appreciate other perspectives that they may not share, but to show that connection, that piece, just in an image, already softens. It opens me up to taking in perspectives that maybe seem violently opposed to my own. And so those are just some of the things I want to reflect back to you. I know that you and I all have a lot to talk about with this, but I think you're doing really great work here.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to say something about democracy, because I think something like this is really needed for democracy, because so on the one hand, in this system we have Republicans and Democrats, and the thing is Republicans and Democrats need each other to balance each other out. And if we saw it from that way, that this perspective and that perspective, the Republicans can see the shadow of the Democrats, and the Democrats can see the shadow of the Republicans, and we need a way to communicate that doesn't, activate reactiveness, that allows us to appreciate the strengths of the other more appropriately, and will allow everybody to be at the table. So democracy is not just about Republicans and Democrats. It's about these people and 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 these people, and you and me and me and me and you and you and you, and so getting all of those perspectives together, with 3 little petals, you can easily keep 3 in your head, but 20 is harder to keep in your head. But if we have a way to, I didn't go into much detail about how to characterize each one, but they can be colored. You can color code them. Like, okay, now we're coming from this perspective, and that petal is colored. Now we're coming from this perspective, and that petal is colored, and so on. John's telling me to stop. Okay. Yeah.
30 seconds.
Can I just say one? It's just a comment. Can I just say a comment, which was, you talked about symmetry, and I love that your petals were all the same size. So it's like everybody's coming to the table, but it's not like one person's petal is smaller than another person's petal.
Yeah.
That they're equally represented and they get equal weight. And it just struck me that how lovely, because I don't think that's always the case.
Right. Exactly. Thank you.
Quickly? Did you want to be quick?
Me? Oh, I'm just going to throw out a few different terms. One of them, the circumambulation. There's 3-dimensionality being embodied, invite in the 4th dimension. And standing in the center is feeling connected to the 4th dimension. And if we, as the Navajo said, speak of throwing an object, the object being the object throws itself. Does that shift the perspective?
Right, exactly.
Anyway.
Mike wants a quickie.
So, get my card, okay? Send me stuff when you see something that, this was Lisa can use this. Send it to me. I will love it.
Do you know Gebser's work, The Grammatical Mirror?
Yeah.
Did you look at that?
Yeah.
This?
Yeah, that's the one that Aaron translated, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's about language and poetry, and how that's where Gebser starts, it seems, looking at the transformations in poetry
Yeah.
that he thinks reveal the coming of an integral age.
Yeah, that I alluded to it very briefly. Okay. John?
Thank you, Lisa.